Hi, I'm Seamless, and here today I'm here to talk to you about essentially my history. The reason why I'm doing this is because I have talked about it before, but mostly in the context of answering questions that pertain to some particular facts about just whatever, and not really all of it all at once. And that is valuable because every so often, usually after breaks and in between semesters of when schooling happens, a whole bunch of people email me about how they're doing an essay about what the hobby that they like in the industry about it, and they come to me to be the guy that they have to interview to talk about their essays, which is totally flattering and completely awesome, by the way. However, it does mean that every time I get the same batch of questions, and I don't feel like writing the same essay over and over again. So from now on, I'm just going to refer to them for this video, at least for the biographical portions of it. So, in the beginning, on September 26, 1988, I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, the United States. My father's side of the family is very musically inclined. My dad himself is a jazz drummer, and he's very much a musical individual, likes listening to music. And all throughout my childhood, he was definitely keen to share with me music, which I found amazingly boring because I was a kid. And I'm going to say what kid likes jazz and classical music, but then I thought about it as my dad was probably that kid that liked jazz and classical music. And so I suppose it's reasonable for him to assume that I might share the same taste, but I did not. Took a very long time for me to eventually come to understand it and actually appreciate that kind of music, but me being a 5-year-old was not that time. My mom and my dad are both very technically minded people. At the moment, they are both IT professionals. They are programmers for their respective companies, and they have been pretty much their whole lives. They're not for this particular company, but they've worked for themselves. They work for other companies, but it's just what they've been doing all the time. Which is the point I'm trying to say is that I have never been one for technical aspects of my life. I've pretty much always had computers. So it was pretty much second nature to me to be using a computer at any given time forever. We're talking about the 90s here, and my parents have always been at the forefront of tech and technology, computer technology. My mom worked with, when she was in college, with punch card machines when they were new, and that's just nuts. Anyway, around when I was 8 or 9, I must have been maybe even 7, that age, I'm not particularly sure when, it was decided that I would do piano lessons. I'm actually pretty sure my mom asked me if I wanted to have piano lessons. I didn't really understand the ramifications of that at the time, but I said yes, and so then I had piano lessons, and I still, to this day, am just the worst at, practicing things. As a child, I would have a weekly one-on-one lesson with the instructor, and I would just not do stuff during the week for the next time. It was just a tremendous waste of time and money for everybody involved. As it turns out, though, I was really, really good at the piano, which meant that I didn't have to practice. And this is going to sound like a backhand, like a reverse bragging or something like that. But talented people have generally had this issue where things are easy for them. And this means that when they want to do things that are actually challenge them, they at first don't really know how, because they're not used to having to actually practice things and for stuff to not just be immediately easy for them. So I had that problem as a kid where I could deal with some of the stuff, and I liked that I could accomplish things without trying very hard. And so when it was presented to me to accomplish more challenging things, I didn't know how to, I just couldn't do it. So my mandated parental forced 30 minutes a day practicing was enough for me to accomplish some pretty ridiculous things as a kid on the piano, but I didn't appreciate any of that because I was a kid, and I didn't get any of it. I did some competitions when I was 9. The accordion music festival or something like that, like a piano and an accordion. Some competition thing that would happen in Newton every year. I did 3 or 4 of those, and the first one I ever did, I placed first. It was 9-year-olds, but it was pretty cool. The one kind of claim to almost fame, it wasn't really a big deal about at the time, was that at the peak of my sort of competitive piano playing, I played an arrangement of Mason Williams' Classical Gas, which is a fun song. I probably still remember how to play it because this, by the way, is how I learned how to play some things. I wasn't super great at reading sheet music, and I had no grasp of music theory other than where notes were and what beats were, that kind of thing. So I would very painstakingly go over measure by measure and memorize things to the point where my muscle memory was all that I needed to play the songs. To the point where I haven't practiced some of these songs in legit 10 years, and I could probably still play them. Not well, but I could get the gist, and that's just how I learned how to play some stuff. So anyway, I played that song, and I was the only person in the entire history of that competition to get a full-on 100 perfect score on the judges' grading scale, and of course I won that. I won $10 because that was the prize pool, and like, so that was me. That was my whole like, yay, I'm cool kind of thing, and I kind of lost interest in actually playing the piano, but I never really had it. Like, it was just like a thing I did. It wasn't really that like I wanted to be a pianist. It was just sort of something my parents made me do to have me do extra stuff. I had no real interest in like pursuing a musical career even as late until actually being in high school. Pretty much throughout, like, from being an 8-year-old to being a high school student, I just played the piano and did regular people stuff. I played EverQuest a lot. I played other games. I had friends, a few friends. I was actually a pretty terrible child, but that was pretty much what happened there. And now the part that's relevant to everyone else is when I actually first encountered FL Studio, which happened in my sophomore year of my schooling. I was extremely lucky because I went to Pioneer Valley Performing Arts Charter High School. It was at the time, it is less so now, it probably still is in comparison to regular high schools, but it was a magical utopia of a high school. Because like I said, I was not having a good time as a kid, and I didn't really like regular public schooling, middle schools, junior high schools. Public high school probably would have not worked out well for me, and it would have been my fault, and it would have been bad. But PVPA was just a magical utopia. Like I said, nobody was an asshole, ever. I was the asshole. That was like the only asshole, which was like a new thing for me. And so like I immediately mailed out and started getting like the whole reason why I went there is because while I was at one of these piano competitions, my mom started talking to another parent of a student who went to PVPA, and she told my mom all about it. And it was, you know, performing arts high school for people who are like, you know, into arts and like playing music, that kind of thing. It also had like theater and visual arts kind of stuff going on. So it covered the bases of performing arts and arts in general. And the thing that got my mom's attention was the fact that somebody at that school actually understood what EverQuest was. And it was something I was really into at the time. And nobody in my like peer group in my other current schools had any idea what the hell that was. So I was kind of always the odd man out, which didn't help on top of the myriad of other problems they had. But so that was the thing that was like, I need to go find out about this school. The way the PVPA worked is that it was a lottery system, and because it's a charter school, and you audition, and then they do it, and then you go in or not, whatever. And I played classical jazz in my audition. And here's the thing though, is that like I was trying to get into performing arts high school, being like, look, I can play piano, but I had no intention of doing anything really musically. Because on top of all the performing arts stuff that PVPA could do, it was actually a really like rigorous fucking high school. Like the way that they worked is that they had a pass-fail grading system, which is to say that you either did it or you didn't. But they also had a revision system where, like, if you fail at something, you just do it again until you pass it. But the way that they would say it is that a passing grade is a minimum of a B. So that means that, like, C's and D's were not passing to them. And so that meant that I had to kick ass and everything. And boy, did I not. I actually was a 5-year high school student for a lot of reasons. And I had on top of, you know, me not liking, you know, the whole talented person problem about practicing whatever, I had the exact same problem with stuff like math and learning and that kind of stuff, and just being a student. Because, like, math in particular, just as an example, I could do it, but, like, it did, much like other disciplines, it requires drilling and practice to really get it in there. I just hated doing that. I just preferred to get it right the first time and not have to worry about it. I never showed my work. I never, like, explained anything. I just kind of gave answers, and I never understood why they failed me for it. Oh, my God, that was so terrible. But, yeah, so that happened. And in the first semester, I didn't do, first year, actually, my freshman year, I didn't do crap, performing arts wise. Okay, so now here's the introduction to FL involves something called Paideia. Paideia is in the middle of the year, in between the first semester and second semester, where there would normally be a gigantic break, I guess. But instead of having a break, what they do is that they spend the entire day doing a performing art of some kind. And there's other not just performing art stuff. Basically, you spend the entire day doing whatever that one thing was. And there were a whole bunch of options. There was stuff like, you know, the show, the theater performance and production, rock climbing paideia, snowboarding paideia, like that kind of stuff. And I went to the fencing paideia, and I learned how to fence. And that was a lot of fun, actually. Really hard. And the school had a fencing team. The school had a lot of teams. It had a mock trial team, which, like, I think it didn't win nationals, but I think they went to nationals. They might have won nationals. They're really good. And they had, like, soccer teams and all this kind of stuff. And I was in the fencing team because I thought it sounded neat. And that was fun. That was a cool deal. And I didn't really get into any kind of performing arts or anything until the very end of that year, where I went on to be, like, a lighting tech for one of the shows. And then I also, from there, went on to be a sound tech for shows for the next year. So, and then the sophomore year onward, I actually started to get into doing performing arts stuff. I basically became a theater tech. You know, like I said, doing sound. I also did lighting for the most part. And actually, that was where I got a lot of my hands-on experience about how audio engineering worked. Like the boards that we used for like mics and mixing and stuff, they're all just regular mixing boards. So like I got a lot of my hands-on experience from doing that. But then on the paideia of that year, I didn't want to do fencing again, and I noticed that they had there's a paideia called electronic music production, affectionately referred to as the techno paideia, and this is where I was first introduced to FL Studio. In fact, it wasn't called FL Studio back then. Actually, it was, but not the version that they had. They didn't have FL4, which was out at the time. They had Fruity Loops 3. It was still called Fruity Loops. This was before they got sued out of the name and had to call themselves FL Studio. They also had Reason 2. They had, in their computer lab, they had a selection of PCs and I believe also Macs. So they had the Mac version, they had the Reason, and then they had the PC version, they had FL, Fruity Loops 3. The teacher... There were two teachers of that paideia. There was one guy named Paul Eggleston, who was like a humanities teacher. He taught history and other stuff, like a lot of other stuff, to not my grade. So I never actually had him as a real teacher except for this paideia thing. And then the other guy was a dude named Mike Pfeiffer, who was the physics teacher. On top of that, he was also a drum and bass producer and DJ, and he was actually really good. So those two were the guys that were handling the paideia, and it was very hands-off. It was they just kind of let us loose on the stuff, and we just did things. Every once in a while, Paul Eggleston is a really big analog, like, synth guy, and he would bring in his ridiculous collection of synths. He plays in a band that's apparently popular in Italy or something like that, and, like, he was the synth dude, and so that was a lot of fun. That was when I received my first actual person instructing me how to use FL. And what Mike Pfeiffer did was he showed me how to use a sequencer, showed me how to load in samples, and showed me how the playlist worked. At the time, the pattern-based blocked playlist in FL3, and that was what I needed to kind of be let loose on my own to just sort of do stuff. And that's where a lot of my earliest shit came from. That was that. And so in the following years, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, and super senior year, I spent pretty much all of my free time messing around with FL Studio. And that year, when I first used FL3, I got a version of it on my laptop. I brought it home. I was messing around with it on my own. And then I convinced my mom to buy me FL4 Producer Edition, which came with Citrus, which it does come with Citrus now, but for a while it didn't. But that's when I first bought it. I want to point out for people who are not aware of this, but FL has free updates for life. That was the time. That was 11 years ago that we paid for it, and I have not paid for it ever since. I paid for some various upgrades, like I bought the video player when I was doing like film scoring and that kind of thing. I think I also bought Harmer, and I think I bought Maximus. No, I didn't buy Maximus. I got Maximus when I became an alpha tester, and they gave me everything for free. So, regardless if they do pay for it, I'm never going to pay for any other stuff ever again. But that was sort of like those couple of years I was messing around with that, and I was primarily focusing on still being a theater tech. And then there was also a couple of recording classes in FL and PVPA, bands, that kind of thing. So like I was really into like learning how to do like the hands-on stuff, but it was really, really, really basic stuff. Basic, low level, super not, like I already had a huge handle on how the recording worked just from being a sound tech, just the amount of stuff that they taught. But they did show us some stuff like they had a copy of Digital Performer on a Mac, and we like had like a studio and like how to work, how to set that up, and how to work with session players and that kind of thing. And so that was pretty valuable as well. around when high school ended. So that this would have been me with 4 years of experience using FL. Was at the end of high school. I still wasn't super great. This was 2007 when I graduated. I wasn't super amazing at doing stuff at the time, but I was still very into it. 2008 is when stuff got kind of real. I took a year off of high school, off of like just schooling in general. I didn't want to go to college immediately because I had plans about what I wanted to do. At this point, I was sort of set in the idea that I wanted to have like some kind of music-based career, so I was trying to go like project myself into going to Berkeley or Rochester School of Music, although I was considering Rochester School, like Eastman School of Music, because at the time I was dating a girl who was going to go to a college in Houghton, New York. And so I was trying to find a college that was close to that. And that was a gigantic driver in my decision-making process at the time, which wasn't super smart. But there we go. But 2008 changed for one very large reason. And that was because in December of 2008, my father gifted to me my first guitar. It's actually, I can show you which guitar it was. Busted chairs, busted. This guitar. This is a Schecter Damien 6-string guitar. I went to Daddy's Junkie Music in West Springfield, and I picked it off the rack, played it once a couple times. I had a friend, I still have this friend, and she actually helped me pick out a guitar because she was herself a guitarist, and she had been for much longer than I ever was, and so she had particular expertise to guide me into like picking up like something else. She taught me how to pick, guitar and that kind of thing. So like once I had that, I had a real guitar. Up until that point, I had been trying to do metal-based things and things with guitar in it synthetically, and this was a time long before shreddage ever existed, and boy, were there not really wonderful things. Also, Guitar Rig wasn't all that great. Just the whole digital emulation of guitar was just so bad, and I was trying super hard to make stuff work. And I honestly like I went hard on that. And I got pretty okay at like making FL Slayer be something that could work, but nothing was better than having an actual guitar. So I got an actual guitar, and this is December 2008. Also in 2008 was when I actually made my YouTube channel, but it was not for music related things. This was I was putting up gaming videos, and I was actually I still called myself SeamlessR back then, because that was when I made, Seamless is actually my gamer handle, and I had been using the handle for a very long time. And whenever I had to go make accounts for stuff, Seamless was already taken, and I wasn't really big on being like an actual musical producer. So what I actually had other names back then. One of them was Moeki, which was my EverQuest handle, Moekii, which is a weird combination of like my initials and some friends, and also the second because I actually made another character. He died, and made a new one, and that was the second. So that's what the two I's were. That was my first like producer alias as well, and then I made another one called Alloy 1, and that was just that. And I tried a whole bunch of stuff with that in that regard. I was still making weird breakbeat kind of Matrix styled action music. That's kind of what I wanted to do. But yeah, actually a very important thing happened in 2004 or 2005. Sorry, 2005. What happened in 2005 was the first time I heard Noisia. I don't know if they actually put out a whole bunch of stuff before that, but that was the VSN 0001. That's when they put out The Tide, and The Tide happened, and I heard that on a radio station I was listening to while I was reading a book, and it changed my life because I had no idea that music could sound like that. I had never heard sound design like that of any kind. That's there were sound design like that already, but I just hadn't been looking for it, and it was just nuts. It was crazy. It was ridiculous. And so I spent the next my attempt to use FL Studio was mostly about me trying to make that kind of music, but I could not. And this is actually a big important part about why I make tutorials, because at the time YouTube actually didn't happen until 2005, and it was terrible in comparison to how it was now. It wasn't widescreen, it was no high quality, it was just bad, and there wasn't really a gigantic tutorial, video tutorial market back in the day that wasn't behind some kind of paywall. And I never, at the time, wanted to pay for tutorials because none of them actually had any way of proving that they knew what they were talking about. And anybody that did know what they're talking about, especially about stuff like Noisia sound design, absolutely did not want to tell anybody what they were doing. And they would even go so far as to say that they knew, but they just didn't want to tell you. And they didn't want to tell you because they're afraid that you would, cop their secrets and, go do better. It's a big competitive thing. And it's so, I understand the thought, but it still pissed me off because they kept, and they, or either that or they give me really vague instructions, being like, "Dude, just detune some saws. You're fine. That's all it is." I'm like, "That's not all it is. You know, it's not all it is. God damn it!" And I mean, this is a lot of the reasons why way later, when I finally figured out how to do this stuff, my first thought was to make tutorials about it, because I just hated the fact that I was being held back by an understanding of technical stuff like sound design, which just seemed like the most uncreative, unmusical part of the actual creative process, which I obviously don't believe now, but it's what I thought at the time. So it made me really mad to not have the information, and that nobody appeared to have the information at all. It was just a gigantic mystery at the time. But I still tried. I tried really hard. I had a couple of like reasonable attempts made at the time, and I just lacked super basic understandings of things like mixing and mastering and any kind of like that stuff. I made a lot of weird tracks, a lot of which you can find on my SoundCloud. I just put them up there as old stuff. Yeah, and so like that was what I was doing during high school. And along the way, once I actually got my guitar, this started my transition into wanting to be a metal musician. I never wanted to be like a guitarist. I never wanted to play, like, I didn't want to be the guy that played a guitar in a band. I didn't actually even want to be in a band. I just kind of wanted to make metal stuff. And I got a copy of Easy Drummer, and I had my guitar, and I would use like the Poolin stuff. And this was 2008, 2009, because December 2008 was when I got the guitar, so it was mostly 2009 when I was experimenting with having a guitar. And so that was kind of like the stuff that I wanted to do. And around then, 2010, was when my band Krakatoa formed. It initially formed because a guy that I knew in high school named Tom, which I didn't really associate with much, wanted to make a metal band, and he heard from other people that I did music stuff, so he came to me to be like, "Hey, want to be in a band?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." They wanted me to be in a band to be a keyboardist. And at the time, we were going to be in this project that they called God Eater. The project involved me, my friend who helped me buy the guitar. Her name was Lexi. 2 drummers, Tom, and this other guy named Eric, who was also being a guitarist. I was being a keyboardist. I don't think we had a bassist at the time. Oh, I think we did. It was Tim. His name, I believe he was on board with that project. We had a couple of writing sessions, and that didn't pan out. That wasn't a thing. But out of that, the core group, myself, Tom, and our drummer Aaron, decided that we wanted to make a band of Krakatoa. So we wrote some songs with that in mind. This is like some of the super early stuff, like Cordyceps Spores was the first thing that ever became a Krakatoa song. And that whole album, the Microbellum album, those were all the first stuff that we ever wrote. We have a re-recording of that, but if you want to see what my production was like, you can actually go onto our YouTube, which is Krakatoa Metal Band, all one word. That's our account name. And you can find the really old recordings of what, like, because they were essentially produced like manually. And there were some live recordings. Like I tried to record Aaron as a drummer, but we had to use triggers and stuff because my studio, this is actually the same room that I was using back in the day, but it wasn't this built because I didn't have these walls. I didn't have the other room on the other side. It was just a room. It was a concrete cube. And boy, did I try some weird shit to make that work. But all on this stuff, this attempt that we're trying to do, I realized that I had a kind of a knack for figuring out the technician aspects of like being a recording engineer. And I decided that that's what I wanted to do. At this time, I was going to college. I was going to HTC, Holyoke Community College in Massachusetts. And my plan was that I was going to do 2 years of community college with the music theory kind of angle. And then I was going to transfer to Berkeley or some other school, Eastman maybe, and just go do music as a degree. And that experience is one of the big reasons why I don't advocate for going to college for music. And not because it's bad, because it's actually pretty okay, but like I mostly just don't advocate for going to college for stuff that you already know about, because damn. And also because I'm just a bad student, so that might not matter to some people. And there's also way more things about how like schools now actually have some amount of modernity, is that a word? About what they teach. They actually teach some stuff that wasn't, all the rage in the 80s, and they actually acknowledge the digital presence and like current recording trends and that kind of thing. But at the time, there was jack shit that taught about any of the stuff that I wanted to know, like sound design, that kind of thing. Even now, I don't think they do, but they are getting close to getting to the point where they will. So that's kind of cool. But just anyway, and it was in my 3rd semester of ACC where I decided that I was going to drop out and build my own studio. And that was when I began the construction of this room, which took a year because I decided not to actually hire like an actual like professional. I did hire someone who was a professional, but he was a retired professional, and he did a pretty good job. He had some limitations. The only problem with that was that like it was hard for him to be doing what he was doing, and so I had to work with that. And there wasn't really going to be anybody better. But then he moved, and so then I had to get some other people to help me actually finish it. It took like 3 or 4 different entities of individuals to eventually make this thing become a thing. It did eventually get finished, and now it's the studio that I use today. My whole plan at the time was that I was going to, this was like 2011 now, I was going to record local metal bands. That was going to be my whole thing. I made up a thing. My studio's name is actually called Caldera Studios, Caldera being a type of volcano in reference to my band's name, Krakatoa. At this point, Krakatoa is actually picking up pretty okay in the local scene. Like, we made connections, we know people, we play shows at bars a lot. Like, we're doing pretty okay. It's around this time that I also made my crazy, ridiculous bass guitar, which I have over here. This thing. This is actually the second version. This is V2. V1 was basically the same idea, only instead of having the this like plywood construction like drilled into the bass to actually make it stick, I basically just glued the 2 keyboards onto a bass guitar, and that was how that worked out. The reason this exists, by the way, this thing is called the Super Bass Double Keytar. I think I already said that. If I didn't say that, that's what it's called. But the reason this exists is because early on in our days, the guy, that Tim guy that we had be a bassist for our other project, actually moved to California, and that meant that we didn't really have him. Actually, I think he might have moved to Boston first, but he wasn't around. So we didn't have our original ideas about who we wanted to be a bassist actually available to play the bass for the live version of the band. So our plan was that our bass lines are pretty simple, so why not just train somebody to be a bass player? This is because people who identify themselves as being bassists generally don't want to play metal, because metal is boring as fuck. And if you're a bassist, like a trained bassist, you probably learn how to play jazz, which is just way more interesting for a bass player to be playing. Or even the classic rock is way more interesting than bass to be playing. And like, there are some metal bassists that do some really interesting stuff, but that's not everybody, and that's not everybody that wants to do that kind of stuff. So we just kind of we couldn't find somebody who was a bassist who wanted to be our bassist. So we decided that we were just going to make a bassist by finding somebody, giving them a bass guitar, because I had bass guitars, and letting them learn how to play bass. That didn't work out. That was like 5 people we tried doing that with. And then there was the wacky ideas we had. Like, we were going to bring in another keyboardist, because I was still just a keyboardist at the time, playing my M-Audio Keystation 88 Pro. And, like, or the reason why we even had the mini keyboard was that we were going to take a mic stand, glue the MIDI keyboard at the bottom of it, and then Tom, our vocalist, was gonna like play it like a keytar and then sing into the mic, which actually still kind of sounds like a baller idea, but that wasn't gonna work out. And so one day, I had the bass, I had the keyboard, I put it down there, I was just like, there's no way this can work. And I explained the idea to Tom, and he was drunk, and he was like, whoa! And I was just like, there's just no way, this can't be a thing, because the whole way this thing works is that the idea is for the parts where I play the keyboard, I tap the bass line, and there's like 1,000 compressors on my tone because I run it through FL on stage. And I just sustain it, and I just play the bass like that, the bass line beneath it, and I play the keyboard. And then for the stuff that would have been just like the left-hand stuff, or like larger chords that couldn't really play with that keyboard setup, I would actually record as samples and trigger using my feet, using, I don't think you can see it. You might be able, yeah, you can see it like right there. That thing, that's my pedal board. That's the FCB 1010. It's 10 buttons and 2 expression pedals. And so that thing, I was basically going to Geddy Lee it up and just like play the piano parts with my feet. And in some parts of some songs, do all 3 at once. Play the bass, play the keyboards on the bass, and play the feet. And the amount of stuff that has to work for that to be a thing is insane. And when I was thinking about it, I knew about all the things that had to work, and I just didn't think it would. I didn't think that would any way be stable, that I would be able to reliably play that, or that it would be any kind of easy. It's not any kind of easy. It's actually really fucking hard. But I was astounded, nonetheless, when I discovered that, in fact, is a system that does work. And now it's a gimmick, and now I can't not do it. So that's just how I play Krakatoa now. So that's why that bass exists. This has been doing a thing. So right now we're in like 2012-ish. And I've been recording bands. I've been doing that. That's kind of my business model, just getting bands, being cheap. I was $15 an hour for tracking, plus some amount of money for mixing and mastering. I did flat rates for bands. Like, that's just, it was looking, if I kept up with that, it probably would have been a reasonable business model. And I'm actually opening a new studio in East Hampton, Massachusetts, with Tom's dad, who owns a new house. The basement is much better than my mom's basement, so we're looking to build a studio in there. I'll pay rent, and then I'm going to expand a bit to do that because it'll be really cool. We are looking to do a little bit more with Krakatoa than we have been doing, and we feel like we're pretty much, like, we're at the point where if we get our shit together, we pretty much can. So it's gonna be cool, a cool couple of years for that. So anyway, that was 2012, or the beginning of 2012, and this is where the seamless stuff starts to take off, because this is when I discovered that you could resample stuff with Harmor. Now, throughout the years of me trying to sound like Noisy and general drum and bass, that whole thing, I understood how a Reese was made. I understood how, like, detuning saws worked and filtering and that kind of thing. I just did not know how to bring it all together to make any kind of, like, those sounds. But I knew resampling was a part of it. And resampling is a weird term, because the reason why resampling was a big deal for these kinds of sound designs, especially back in the day, is because for two reasons. One, because you're using hardware and you don't have a billion things to change because it's hardware. So you record a sample out, put it back in, put it back in, put it back in, and do it over and over again. Or you have digital stuff, but your processing power can't handle having a billion things, so you do it again and again, that kind of thing. Or you do audio processing that's specific to being processed onto actual audio, and not something that you can actually do with live synthesis. Those are the reasons why you resample stuff. And I got a couple of okay experiments using, like, time-stretching resampling to get something to sound kind of neat. And one time I actually figured out the bass vocoder growl thing around this time, which I'm pretty sure was after Skrillex did it. The other people had done it too, so it wasn't like it was a super new thing, but it was a new popular thing anyway. I figured that one out, but I did it with a Reese, and I did it with Vocodex. It was a gigantic accident, actually, that I did that, but I did it. It ended up being kind of neat. Obviously. Other things include... I was gonna say something about... Oh, yeah, I was also... funny, this is around when, like, I was still just a big user. I used Massive, pretty much only used Massive at the time. And I used Massive back then because I did not know enough about how to make my own stuff without Massive, with normal stuff, without the wavetables. But then the Harmor resampling happened, and I was like, wait a minute, the reset that says demo looked like it was just putting audio in there. And now here's the thing about Unison. This is why this is important. This is why the thought process. It turns out this is not actually true at all about the stuff that I wanted to do, but just hear me out. So the reason why Unison is super important is because when you do resampling, you can detune it against itself again, and then you can keep doing that, and eventually it sounds like a really neat thing. But a lot of people are asking, like, well, where's the Unison VST? How do I put that in post? And the only way you can do that in post is by recording it out and then doing it again manually. There are some workarounds, and like plugins like chorus plugins and phasers and that kind of thing use that workaround. But true actual Unison is what's referred to as a voice effect, which is to say that it's a result of playing the same thing at the same time with different parameters. And also, like a super saw, for example, is you playing a whole bunch of saws together with different pitches at different starting phases, and then you get the sound. That's how Unison works. So my thought was, okay, cool. If I resynthesize the sound, I'm playing it like it's a synth now, and that means I can use real Unison. And damn. And I didn't know about stuff like Contact, how you could do that, or other samplers that allowed you to just do this kind of stuff, and even the FL sampler where you could basically do this. I didn't know about that, but the Harmor was a much more clear concept for me, so I did that. I didn't even know how to use Harmor as a synthesizer. I just knew how to use it as a resampling engine at this point. And I did that, and that was when I made my track Saturated, which is super old. And I put that up there. I put that up on the ImageLine forums, and I was just being like, look, here's this idea. And then I made a tutorial about it. And ImageLine posted that tutorial on their Facebook page. Not only that, but around this time also with these experiments, I was contacted by Toby Emerson of Black Octopus Sound. And he offered me he said that if I wanted to, I could make a sample pack and sell it on his website. That sample pack is called Twisted Tools, I think. No, it's called Twisted Neuro. It was originally called Neuro-Based Tools, but I think somebody, or maybe it might still be called that, but it was called something, and now it's called something else because someone else had the name, so we changed it. But that pack's still there, and it actually still sells. And those were like my earliest original Harmor resampling experiments that I was doing at the time. So I made Saturated, and then I made Bitten, And this is when I started to realize that my process for resampling wasn't actually working out very well because I didn't save any of my states. I just kind of did it randomly over and over again to the point where I could never recreate what I was doing reliably. So then I started to save the individual steps for things, and around then I think I made mutate, which was a bunch of presets of saved resample states. So this was starting to, like, this is how I started making tutorial. I made like 1 or 2 tutorials. This was even before I started calling it How to Base. Even How to Base 1 was not actually called How to Base 1 originally. I actually renamed it to be How to Base 1 because I wanted to make How to Base 2 base harder. So that's why How to Base 1 existed. Anyway, How to Base. So I started doing tutorials, and Image Line would post it on their Facebook page, and I started to realize this could be a thing. I'm getting way more traction doing tutorials than I ever was with any of the music I've ever made. And so I was just like, fuck, okay, I'll just do this. I was getting some good attention about that kind of thing. And then the next kicker happened. The next kicker was that I finally figured out how to use FM synthesis. And this was after I watched a dubspot tutorial. A totally awful dubspot tutorial that failed in pretty much every way to do the thing that I said I was going to do. But it was about FM synthesis. And it did a good enough job explaining the basics of FM synthesis. Fuck, I hate saying that. And that was all I needed. That was all I ever needed, was someone to explain to me that you changed the intensity of FM from one operator to another operator by changing the volume of the modulating operator. I didn't know that. And then when I didn't know that, I started messing around with it. I was like, oh, this is amazing. And I got real FM happy. And that's when I made Dreams of Bass. Now, the thing about Dreams of Bass is that was my first real attempt at making like an honest-to-God actual electro track. I had made a couple before. I made one called Whoosh, and I accidentally, this entire track, those are actually still on my YouTube channel. You can go back far enough, you'll find them. Those were the ones that were me trying to actually, for real, make an electro track. I had never really done the kind of 4/4, like, boof, 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 like those kinds of tracks. I had always made breakbeat tracks. And so this is like very unfamiliar to me, but also this is also the time when Feed Me had been around for kind of a while, and also Knife Party was starting to be a thing. I was a gigantic super fan of Pendulum back in the day as well, and so that kind of made me sad about how they were doing Knife Party. But then I started to understand sort of the value of the sound design, which I also loved in the original, like the Hold Your Color album for Pendulum stuff. But I started to experiment with actually, so I did some research. I actually started listening to electro tracks like on purpose, and I listened to Feed Me stuff, Knife Party stuff, Madian stuff, old like really early Madian stuff, because this is Madian was pretty early, and I was like, oh, I just had to do it like this, because Dreams of Bass I did blind. What I mean by blind is I didn't actually do any research into how electro sounded. I just kind of did it based on my own weird memory of it, even though I never really listened to it in terms of like actually trying to do it. The closest track I ever listened to that was actually like maybe electro was the Island Part 2 on Immersion. And so then this is actually one of the big reasons why now when people talk about how to make certain genres or whatever, I actually advocate for analytically listening to the thing that you want to make. Go listen to a thing, pay attention to how it sounds when they do certain things, how it's arranged, that whole idea. And then I did that, and that was Bass Antics. And I actually made a joke to Tom, my vocalist, when I was doing Krakatoa stuff, saying that, like, I know that metal's not a very popular genre, but I bet you if I put this up, it'll get way more traction than anything that we've ever done with Krakatoa. And I just like, watch this be the thing that makes me famous. Well, anyway, I made Bass Antics, and that started my sort of direct relationship with Image Line. Oh, not really. There was another track. It was an electro experiment before I actually made Bass Antics. Dreams of Bass was kind of important because that was also one of the first times that I had ever done a track like that actually used only FL stuff. And there was a weird reason for that. I had a whole bunch of samples, a bunch of third-party samples that I used, but they were all very breakbeat oriented, and I didn't have anything that would really work well for the electronic genre, like the electro genre. But FL had a whole bunch of those basic sounds in there that worked out. That was kind of what I wanted. And I also realized that I was doing what I was doing with Citrus because I could never figure out FM8. I can now, but at the time, but I can figure out Citrus. I had actually been using Citrus for a very long time, but I was using it basically as a 6X OSC because I didn't understand how FM worked. But now that I understood it, like I was just like always on point about it. I was using that. I was using Harmor presets because I still didn't understand how to actually synthesize with Harmor. And those were the things that were making the track. So it actually was very easy for me to stick within the confines of FL stock stuff, which used to be very difficult for me. And that was a big deal because that meant that I could actually put the FLP up on the forums being like, look, here's the whole thing. And people just like lost their mind about the fact that those kinds of sounds could be made with FL stuff. Nobody at the time had any idea. Most people at large just didn't even know that FM was really a thing they could do about that, which is also one of the big reasons why my tutorials took off, because it touched on it and taught about how to do that stuff that no one was talking about at all. So that was a big reason for that kind of stuff. But that also meant that the image line people took interest in me, because that meant that I was showing how to do popular things with their software, and that was a big reason why they liked me. And so they made me an alpha tester. I was making some new stuff, and this was FL10 that I was using this stuff on, and FL 10.5 was the beta for FL 11, and then they negotiated for me to include some of my projects in FL 11. Basic Antics was one of the big ones at the time. It was the first one that really was like, this is I kind of get this. I kind of get it now. I also made Sometime, Menagerie, and Anticoder. I actually made Anticoder to be specifically the FL11 track, because I was using mostly FL11 things like Patcher. I had never really used Patcher before at this time. And but they wanted Sometime. They wanted Sometime because it was very melodic and very cool sounding. And then they also got Vila to sing on it. Vila sang on that track, like, and finished the vocals for it 2 days after they like contacted her. I had no actual contact with her. Image Line was the one that set that up, and she like just did it, and it was good. And I made some of the harmonies using Pitcher, and then Nucleon arranged the chopped vocals that are in Harmor, because at the time I still didn't know how to use Harmor. And those were the things that ended up being the Sometime track. And then that became the main new stuff demo file for FL Studio 11. And that was one of the biggest things that happened for me. And it was a gigantic boost, and it's probably still one of the main reasons why people come to my channel, is because of that song, and also because of the 4 other ones that are in, well, 3 other ones that are in the project files. So that was a huge, unbelievable help. And by the way, a lot of people are asking about how do they send stuff, projects to FL to get it in there. You just send it to them, make it using their stuff, send it to them, and if they like it, they'll take it. That's really all there is to that. Anyway, so this was still 2012-ish when this was happening. And basically at this point, the rest of it's kind of recent history. Like, since then I've been doing more or less the same thing. I created the How to Bass series. I started like interacting with things. This is when Monster Cat was kind of new. And Monster Cat's important because Monster Cat, along with other people, formed the EDM District thing. And then when EDM District was new, one of the things that they were doing is that they had the EDM studio side of it, where they're trying to have like an educational bent on other producers talking about stuff. And they wanted me to do some tutorials for stuff. So they actually sponsored the original FL Studio Basic tutorials for the FL11 series. And actually, if you go and watch the original ones, you'll see the little logo somewhere on the thing. And that's kind of what that was all about. I never had a tremendous actual like interaction with people on the label side, but I did actually sign my YouTube channel over to the EDM District multi-channel network, the MCN, which, as nice as those guys were, is not something I ever recommend doing, just at large. MCNs are not super helpful, just in my experience. It might just be because I'm not really that large. Maybe when I'm gargantuan in 10 years from now, I might actually have a reason for that. But the time being, especially, like, it's just kind of weird. Here's a weird sort of sequitur. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's really loud. Anyway, sort of a non sequitur by YouTube. But if they tell you that they could pay you more money, they have a higher CPM, they can help you get views, and they can gauge your connections, all this, whatever. Every single MCN pitch I've ever gotten has been verbatim that, and they do not deliver. They just don't. So if you've got like 1,000 subscribers and they're coming at you for that kind of shit, don't fucking do it. It's never going to be better than just your direct relationship with Google. Just saying that. I have a good relationship with the MCN I'm on now because it's actually fixed MCN, and not just for just contract reasons based on how we handle our interactions and how I'm paid and whatever, but also because it's stuff they actually do for me. So that's, there's value in that. But just regular normal MCNs are just not something that you ever want to care about. Just saying that there. Anyway, so I've been making tutorials. Every once in a while, like I'll put out an album. My first album was kind of a weird deal. I started making it actually on a label that wasn't not a label anymore, but I wasn't planning on doing it on an EP at the time. I had actually just put out every track I'd ever done for free, and I would put out a new one. I put out a making of, and then I'd put out the FLP I would do a pay what you want for the FLP, and that's how that was one of my revenue streams. Wasn't a very good one, but it was one of them. And I do those up on the Black Octopus site, and some of them are still there, but that's just they're old. But so this guy came up to me, and I was like, you know, whatever, why not? I'll take a chance. I'll make an EP. It wasn't like an established label, but I decided that if I was going to take a chance, why as well be on someone that not really a thing. Just to see, it's kind of like a control experiment. I'm controlling for everything else by saying that if it is only me that can give a draw for something, then let's see how good I can do. That crashed and burned for a lot of reasons. Some of them actually were me jumping the gun on some things. Some of them were other just weird stuff. This is also around when I started working with Sean Law, but it got weird. This is also when this is also around the time that I was discovered by BT. The BT thing happened because of a lot of really funny shit that went down with AU5 and Fractal that I actually don't know if I could talk about because I'm not sure they want me to talk about it because it involves somebody else, and I don't know if they care. They might, but I'll take a chance on it. Anyway, long story short, somebody was ripping my stuff off and passing it off as their own, and when they were called on it and they couldn't reproduce it, they directed AU5 Fractal to me. And when they found me and they found my channel and they found my stuff, they were very impressed. They showed BT, and he was very impressed, and he came to me and he said that he wanted to learn how to do that kind of stuff. And so then we set up a time to talk about doing Skype stuff, and that was the beginning of my relationship with BT. BT then introduced me to Fixed, and then when the original label deal that I was having with my EP that I was building, this is Momentum, crashed and burned with the Fixed, I said, well, I have these other songs, and here's actually I was still doing that. I was still working on the other label before I was doing the Fixed thing because it was an agreement that I had before I made the agreement with Fixed. So I was actually working on the new songs on Momentum. So there was 3 new songs and 4 old songs on Momentum, and the new ones were Deathblow, Remember, and Codename Hurricane. Those were the 3 new songs that I was going to just be its own thing. But then when the other one crashed and burned, I was like, hey, I have these 4 other songs. You want these? And it's like, yes. So that's how the Momentum came about, was that whole thing. And then Momentum came out, and then I was pushing that, and it was a good day, good time. And I immediately started, like, that was my introduction to how, like, EPs worked, which was kind of a weird thing for me to actually release music, because it meant that I had to sit on a lot of music for a long time when I was used to just putting out a track when it was done, which has its own drawbacks, but that's just how the world works now. That was 2013. I'm getting pretty bigger. I did the K tutorials when I hit 20K. I did the 20K tutorials, and then I did 30K and 40K, and I'm going to do. Did I do 50K? No, I think I just did 40K. I forget why I didn't do that. But anyway, I'm not gonna do that again until 75. By the way, after that happened, I started to do some work for people like Sonic Academy, the Create Digital Live in Seattle. That was more recent, but that's actually this year. But between now and then, I've basically been doing the same stuff. I've been making more tutorials, designing more, like trying to design more sounds, due to live streaming stuff. Twitch contacted me when they were initializing their whole music streaming thing. They wanted to have some like producers to actually come on and do some stuff, and he contacted me about that kind of thing. And now I'm doing this thing with Splice, and like that was all. This has all been very long time in the making. It started out around then. It's really kind of a straight line from there to here. The stats basically indicate that I've had a steady increase ever since, and like years past, and I've been growing. I'm trying to think if anything really important happened after. So like the BT thing happened, I just kind of went and just kind of kept doing stuff. There were a couple times where I sort of fell off and I stopped doing a lot of videos, and then more recently, I kind of was having a bad time sticking up my my actual release schedule. But I'm back on that now, and hopefully I'll stay that way. And then yeah, now I'm me. Really a lot of like the important milestones about how I learned about stuff that I was doing were mostly happened before I started making tutorials about that kind of stuff. My experiences before then really contributed a lot to how I did stuff now. Because when I started doing like the first tutorials that I made, I really only knew as much as I knew when I was making those tutorials. Every new tutorial was something new that I figured out. I didn't have a schedule back then. I wasn't doing how to base every Friday. In fact, sometimes I put out 3 how to bases in a day because I would keep finding out new shit, and I'd be like, I have to tell people. Like that was how the tutorials went. It wasn't really about. I used the sounds as like an example, being like, here's what you can do with this idea, and here's how this is built, that kind of thing. But it was still an example of those ideas based on me just being like, I just figured this out, and this is really dope. But at the time, like, the idea of FM synthesis for me was still very new. The idea of resampling with Harmor was still new. I was still learning how to use Harmor as like a synthesis thing, and every time I did, I would talk about it in a how to base kind of thing. And because people have this idea in their head that like I have always known all that I've known, and that's really not the case. I really didn't know even close to what I know probably like in 2012 when I was starting out, I probably knew maybe 1/3 of the stuff that I know now about just like sound design and making music in general. Before 2012, like 2008, when I was trying to start the metal thing, I knew maybe 1/20th of what I know now about what I was doing. It was so, like, I knew so much less about what I'm doing now, and it was mostly the experimentation and just doing stuff that helped me to realize sort of what I have now, and that kind of thing. But, yeah, timeline-wise, that's pretty much what contributed to that. I was going to say something about whatever. Anyway, that's usually mostly the questions people want to have answered. It's sort of like how did I learn what I learned, and like what was I doing when I was a kid, and that kind of thing. Much like a lot of producers now, I did start out when I was in high school. The difference between most people now and most people then is that a lot of the genres people want to make now didn't exist when I was starting out. So it was a very different world, and I'm sure the world will be just as different 10 years from now. So how's that for perspective? Anyway, if you actually stayed through all of this, damn, I hope you learned some stuff. But if you have any questions about this, please remember to like, favorite, and comment, and I'll answer them. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. That's what I wanted to say. And if you have any questions about anything, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.